You may be seated. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of all the ages is our refuge. Friends, we have gathered here together this day to remember and give thanks for the life of Ross Frederick Richardson, known to all as Fred. A beloved husband to Betty for nearly 50 years, beloved brother and uncle, father and grandfather and great-grandfather to all their shared family, and a valued and honored colleague and friend to so many around the globe who are joining us here in spirit. Fred embraced his life with purpose and passion and warmth. And it was a long and rich and storied life indeed. So many memories to be shared as we gather to celebrate all he meant to so many people and to be strengthened and supported in his loss by one another and by God's presence in this place. Let us enter now into this loving presence, seeking God's grace and God's comfort. Let us pray. O God of light eternal, in whose love and power the world took shape, grant us now the silence of the heart, in which we can recall that we are never separated from the love which created us, nor from the love that surrounds us all the days of our lives. Bring us now into your presence, and let us be strengthened and supported there. Amen. So many memories of such a long and rich life. And I am very glad to invite Paul Richardson, Fred's son, to come forward to offer the first of these remembrances.
Tough times require masks, I guess. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming here today to honor my father. Thank you, St. Matthew's, for hosting this event. I must say, this was my childhood church, and not 100 yards from here, I had a very brief Cub Scout career in the gym downstairs, and I had an even less durational career in the church choir. That wasn't a very illustrious part of my life, I can tell you that much. My father was a truly amazing man. I have to be honest with you, I was hesitant to speak today because when I thought about it, of my immediate siblings, my sister Sherry, my brother Bob, I was the one who lived the least amount of time with my father, just the first 12 years of my life. And when you include the next generation of siblings that came to us, I realized the other day that of the 6 of us, which included my stepbrother Gerald, my stepsister Dana, and my stepbrother Kenny, God rest his soul, I was the only one in the last 50 years that never even lived in the same city as my father. But when I reflected on it, it's amazing when your father passes how vivid the memories are that come back to you and the fun times that we had. And I couldn't miss the opportunity to impart with you here today some of the humorous anecdotes, some of the fun stories that we had together. So I'm going to deal with Fred Richardson on his personal life. Other speakers will deal with his amazing accomplishments in the business side. And I'm going to speak from my heart. I hope I bring a little levity to the proceedings today. And we'll have a little fun with it along the way, I'm sure. A couple of things I want to deal with. I'm going to say a bunch of words that best describe my father, and then I'll deal with each one a little later on. I'm going to talk about things that I learned from my father, and I'm going to talk about personality traits that were passed down from my father to each of us, and some of the traits that didn't make it that far. And I hope to conclude without breaking down, which may be a nearly impossible thing here today. Some of the words that describe my father: brilliant, hardworking, competitive, teamwork, focused, goal-setting, fun, frugal, yes, frugal, very frugal, humorous, self-deprecating. It's okay, it's a big word for me too, but I'm going to have some fun with that one today. Amazing sleeper, leads to some great stories. Horrific driver. Compassionate and kind, gentle, humble, and proud. Some of the memories that rushed back to me this week were amazing trips that we had in my early years. Every year we would go to my father's farm where we grew up, a little town, Burnstown, Ontario. And those are special trips. And when I think about it, I think he wanted us to see where he grew up, his humble beginnings. And they were amazing memories, and I think my cousin David, who's going to speak, will cover some of that for you. The things that really hit me when I thought about this are the one-on-one times that I had with my dad. As you can imagine, they were very rare, but they were amazingly special. The fishing trip when I was 10 in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, just my dad and I. And he took pleasure in simple things in life. I remember the best thing I think he thought about that fishing trip was how great the homemade bread was that the cook made every day. My dad and I didn't have that much in common, and I think when we started to golf, I think I was 10, and I don't think he took up golf till he was like 38, and he would take me out to Hammond's Plains Road for this crummy little par 3 that they had there, and I think it was his way of having something to do with his son, and those were special times. We were both terrible golfers, but we had fun. I went skiing once with him all by myself to Mont Gabriel. Spectacular trip, and again, the treasure of having one-on-one with my dad was a super time. It was funny, another thing that he took up at the amazing age of 42 was skiing. And I think that was another thing that he figured he could do with his family, Sherry, Bob, and I. And the Wentworth trips, some years it didn't snow at all, and he'd rented an entire place for the whole winter. But the one time I really remember, and this leads to the frugal part of my father, was he rented a trailer, a tiny little trailer, in the middle of the winter, and he parked it in an empty trailer park. And we had a little heater that was so loud, and it was probably the death trap, right? It was, plug this thing in, and I think it was to save money on the motel. We lived in that little trailer, and we had some amazing stories. Some of the other great trips, I think, when you try to merge two families with 6 kids, and I may be wrong on this, but I think the 6 kids, when they married, ranged in age between 13 and 19. That was an amazing time to try to put those two families together. And it wasn't exactly the Brady Bunch, because, again, we never lived together. But he always tried to put a trip together every year to bring us together. And although it wasn't like a Brady Bunch TV show, you could put some of the antics from those trips into a Netflix series for sure. I think the trip to Spain would probably be a mini-series all by itself, but we don't need to talk about that one here today. The other trips that we had as a group, we skied in the Alps, all of us. Amazing trips, got to know my step family. He bought a place in Sugarbush, Vermont, which my wife Dawn and I and kids were happy about because we could drive there from Kingston. And we would get a trip every year down to Sugarbush. We had a trip to Sugarloaf with everyone. And I remember, I don't know who came up with the award, but it was called the Wood Award. And Wood stood for Worst Wipeout of the Week. And here it comes back to the self-deprecation. He showed us it was good to make fun of yourself. And at the end of every week, we would all basically nominate wipeouts of the week. And he took so much pleasure in judging who had the best wipeout of the week. Because if he wasn't there, if he didn't see the wipeout, you had to get up and explain and dramatically tell how it did. And he loved that. And I think that's one thing I did learn from my father for sure was there's nothing wrong with making fun of yourself. He took up golf at a late stage, and he had one of the most horrific driving ability I've ever seen. His swing was horrendous, as mine. I guess that's one of the traits that I got from him. But he made light of it, and he took up the game, and he loved it, and it took him a lot of places around the world, and it gave him great enjoyment. A couple of the words I don't think I need to dwell on, but brilliant and hardworking speak for themselves, and I'm sure other speakers today will deal with that. I think competitive, it was amazing how competitive my father was, and I'm sure that came down to the kids. We would have card games. Our family card game was 10 and back, and they were vicious. They were cruel. It was about winning for sure, and he never took it easy on his kids, which unfortunately is another trait that I took from him. I never took it easy on my kids. My brother Bob and I and Fred would have a tabletop hockey league, and we would play the 6 NHL teams against each other, like 30 games. Dad would be Boston, Bob would be Toronto, I'd be Montreal, and we would play for endless hours, and I really cherish those times. Teamwork and leadership. I think the teamwork is something hopefully that I picked up. Benefit of being part of a team, developing leadership skills. I know he used that in the business world, and I think that came down to us in a big way. Focused and goal setting. My dad was very focused, as we all know, and I think he taught me to set goals for myself. Achievable goals that you could measure yourself on, and it was always just before you reached that goal, you could just make it a little higher so that you pushed yourself a little bit further. The focused one and the always looking ahead leads me to another interesting story that I'll intertwine with horrific driving. I was going to a Maritime Life picnic, and of course we were running late, and my dad was driving, which I was always scared when my dad was driving. But it was one of the few times in Fred's life that he was picked up for speeding. And again, I was just me in the car, and the police pulled us over. And as the police pulled us over, another police car came from the other direction and basically stopped on the other side of the road. And I was thinking this was kind of crazy. And the policeman came up to the door, and he told Fred that he was speeding. And he said, "Sir, do you realize that I was following you with my lights on for 5 kilometers? And I thought you were running, so I called in help. And that's why they're here." My dad did not look in the rearview mirror. He focused on what was ahead of him. Another one on the self-deprecation idea. I take this out of his memoirs that I reviewed again last week. And I read, and I quote, "When he went to Queens, He said he was a hollow-chested, 125-pound, horn-rimmed glasses, uncoordinated geek. And that is a quote from my father's memoirs. He made fun of himself, and I'm so proud I was able to do that myself. Sleeper. Oh my gosh, he could sleep in a moment's notice. I will tell you two quick ones. One time, Betty and Fred came up to take care of the twins, and my wife and I took the kids to Disney, I think. And Fred, one time, they were both in their own cribs, and Fred offered to put them to bed one night, and we just had to get them into their crib and sit in the rocking chair and rock for a while before they went to sleep. So, of course, Betty was wondering why it took so long, and she finally came up the stairs, and the two kids were under their cribs playing in front of Fred, and he was sound asleep. Another one on the horrific driver's side. We live on a very little road. No one can pass. It doesn't have sidewalks, so the speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour. And when we got back from a trip, I think it was Pat, he's just, Dad, it was amazing. You know how no one actually drives 40 kilometers an hour. Grandpa was driving 30 kilometers an hour, and people were passing him on our road. He'd never seen anyone pass anyone on our road. Compassionate and kind. I like the story when my dad and my mother first got married and were living in Kingston. And one day, my dad actually came home with a homeless guy because he found the guy on the street, and the guy asked him for money for food. And my dad knew that money wasn't going to food, it was going to another bottle of wine. And he said, "No, I won't give you any money, but I'll take you home for supper." And he never did that again after my mother said, "Don't ever bring that guy." My dad was gentle, would never hurt a fly. He didn't like physical contact, meaning the sport activity. Another thing I'll quote from his memoirs was he described hockey as a game of mayhem where players fought with each other with sticks. So he only played hockey once in his life, but he supported us in whatever we wanted to do. He was not a hockey-playing father, and he always said that was great because he could never criticize our game or criticize the coaches because he didn't know anything about the game. But he was there, and he supported whatever we did. Proud. I think he taught me to be proud of who you are and what you do, whatever it is. Personality traits. Here's a question. How does a non-smoker, rarely drinking, not athlete, never go to a bar man produce a chain-smoking, pool-playing, in the diviest bars daughter and two rebel-rousing, partying hockey players? Go figure. I don't know that one. I did learn to let my children try anything they want to do. And whatever it is, support them. It didn't matter if you had the interest or not. And I think that's an important lesson that I hope everyone else can do for themselves. He also said, whatever it is you do it to the very best of your ability. I remember when I graduated from university, and instead of taking a business job, I ended up playing senior hockey in Newfoundland, and it was tough for me to make that call to my dad and admit it. But I remember him saying, look, I don't have to be happy about this, but whatever it is you do it to the absolute best of your ability, and I've learned from that. Recognize your weaknesses, don't hide from them, and actually make fun of them. If you golf with me, again, I'm a terrible golfer, I laugh more at my bad shots than anybody else is, and I have a lot of fun doing it. Regrets. I regret my dad didn't make it to his 50th anniversary with Betty, which would have also landed on his 94th birthday, which would be just in next February. I certainly regret I didn't get to spend more time with my father. I regret that I didn't get down to see him before his death. And I regret that my children didn't get the chance to know their amazing grandfather better. Proud. I am truly proud of my father's business achievements. I'm immensely proud of the love and admiration he showered Betty with for over 50 years. And I'm immensely proud to be able to say I'm the son of Fred Richardson. Love you, Dad. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Dave Richardson, Fred's nephew, to come forward.
You may have to forgive me as I go through this, but you couldn't know Fred without being touched by Fred. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So where I wanted to start, and I was following somewhat your course, thinking of the qualities of Fred, and there's a few of them that I wanted to highlight that go along with what Paul just discussed. And that was Fred's loving way of laughing. He loved to laugh. He loved to smile. When you looked at the pictures at the wake yesterday, many of them showed the real Fred. He's laughing. He's enjoying himself. He loved life as he went through it. And he loved to see everyone around him laughing and smiling. And yes, he made a lot of jokes about himself because he loved to see everyone laugh and smile so much. But you knew behind that was a man that was very confident. He knew his abilities, he was very smart, and he didn't worry about making jokes about himself because he knew who he was on it. I can remember one of my first episodes with Fred was up at the farm at our family reunion, and there was the famous pie incident where all of a sudden they came out with pie, and Fred said, "Where's the ice cream?" They said, "Well, we don't have any ice cream." Fred said, "You can't have pie without ice cream. You got to have ice cream." So he and my father jumped in the car, and there was an ice cream shop about 2 or 3 kilometers away in the town of Burnstown. And they come back, and the two of them have these big smiles on their face, and they're giggling. And they come out, and I'm hoping that they got 2 quarts of ice cream, so I would make sure I got a scoop on this. Well, Fred went there, and it was a place that sold scoops of ice cream. They don't sell bricks of ice cream. So he bought a tub of ice cream for the family reunion. And he's laughing away. And you knew at the time this was somebody that enjoyed life, but was of the view that go big or go home and enjoy it as he went through. And he carried that on all the way through on the many visits with us, that he was always making jokes, always laughing about things, always trying to find the funny side of it, and always trying to share those with you. His zest for life carried on, as will be talked about in terms of his many trips, seeing parts of the world, the Amazon, the Nile, going on safaris, but he wanted to experience life. He wanted to enjoy life, and he knew life had a lot to offer it, and he had to take advantage of those opportunities as he went through, and he did take advantage of those opportunities. One of Fred's great characteristics was how smart he was. But I can remember talking to my father, and I said to Dad, "You know, Fred's a pretty smart guy." And he said, "No, he's a very smart guy." But he said, "You know, when we were in high school, it was kind of funny, because Fred was by far the top student in the school. And he said, everyone in that school think Fred is so smart that everything comes naturally to him. They didn't know that he was studying till 12:30, 1 o'clock at night, and having to be told to go to bed because he worked at it. And work for him was not a word that was wrong. He liked to work. But more importantly, he liked to learn. He did so many things in life as a learning experience. His whole discussion processes, as everyone will talk, if you wanted to talk about a subject, Fred was well read, He had this array of things that he could talk about from a source of knowledge. And he had discussions with everyone, which in my family, we all, when Fred was coming to town, the little feet are getting excited because we're going to have a discussion. And we loved the discussions with Fred on, didn't matter what the subject was, geopolitical, economic, public sector, private sector, you name it. We would have those discussions because we loved having those discussions with Fred because you learned in those discussions. And Fred always treated it in terms of those discussions, that this is an opportunity for him, an opportunity to explore ideas from whoever he was talking to. As my daughter Laura reminded me coming here, Fred would have discussions with young, old. He did not care. He listened. He would actively participate in the discussions because he looked at everyone as having something important to say. And he went through his whole life with looking at everything and saying, you and you and you are important. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you think about some of my ideas as you go through. And it was such a rewarding experience for my family and I because he always treated people as being important. Now, this part I always struggle with. I've tried this 7 times. I haven't made it through this latter part of it, and I'm going to try anyway because it's the caring, compassion side of it. First part's not bad, it's the next parts. Fred cared very much about people, but he also cared about country and business going through. And I can remember in 1995, I was visiting my parents. It was Boxing Day. The phone rang. My mom comes into the room and looks at my dad and says, Jean's on the phone. So my father goes off, and I said, so Mom, who's Jean? And she said, well, Jean Chrétien. You know the Prime Minister, Dave? Oh, that Jean. Okay, yeah, I got it. On it. So then he came back, and so I said, so what's the scoop? You've retired on this. Only to find out that he and Fred and a group of people were providing background material and the input into a policy because the Prime Minister was so upset with the Quebec referendum and felt he needed to address this issue to stop it from overhanging the country. And so Fred, my father, and a group of them all went through preparing this policy form, which became the 3-part strategy of the Government of Canada. So while Fred was noted for his business side, he was very active in the political side, but more focused on people because he actually cared and he wanted to walk the talk and use his energies to help out the country, to help out people as he was going through. Now, in terms of how we treated my family, I can't tell you how excited we were when Betty and Fred were coming to town. It was just a wonderful time when you guys came to town. We so much enjoyed that and so much enjoyed talking and visiting with you. And I can remember my mother was paralyzed in 1996 from surgery, and Fred and Betty came for my brother's funeral in 97. And next thing I know, Fred, Betty, and my dad have had a chat. And my mother had all of a sudden a van that would all have a gate that came down for her and the whole bit. I can't tell you how important that was to my mother and her quality of life for her remaining years. It was enormous to allow her the freedom to get out and to get around on it. And the van had a legacy because when my mom passed away, the van went to a friend of ours who had a very disabled child and carried on. She would always come to us and say, I can't tell you how great it's been to have that van for my child on it. And then on one of the last visits Fred came to town on was 2018. And Fred phoned me and says, you know, I'm 90. These trips are getting tougher and tougher to make. I don't think, Dave, I'm going to make it this year to Ottawa. And he said, you'll need to come to Florida. And I said, well, yeah, no, I think I can come to Florida. I'll work on that. But I said, I've got some major surgery coming up in September, and told him what the surgery was. 2 days later, Fred phones and said, I'll be in Ottawa in August. My surgery was in September. He said, I want to see you before you go in. Because that's the type of person Fred was. And this was not an easy thing. Fred was 90. He was having difficulties walking on it. But he made you feel so important, and he cared so much that he would make the effort to come and see me before I went in for the surgery. So the impacts of Fred as we go through, and I'm sure there's more stories as you go through on the family, was enormous in all of us. And it's a terrible loss that we've had when we lose Fred. But he touched us in so many ways that he's in our hearts and our minds and our memories. And we think about him and laugh. If that's one thought I have with Fred, is to just see his face and the laugh he had as he went through life.
And Patrick Richardson, one of Fred's many grandchildren.
So I'm going to refer to him as Grandpa because that's truly what I knew him as. And I was asked to read a poem, but listening to sort of my dad and Dave, I did think it appropriate to make just a few comments. I don't have a script, so bear with me, but everything that was said struck a massive chord. Everything they said about Grandpa is entirely true, and it's amazing to sort of listen to this all at one spot. My dad is right. He is a terrible golfer. And I remember, I think I was 11 or 12, and I expressed an interest in golf. And I think Grandpa was so frustrated with golfing with my dad. The very next day, a brand new set of golf clubs showed up at my house. I think I had golfed once or twice, but they were there, and Grandpa turned out to be sort of the best golf partner there was. I think it was grade 7 or 8. I was 11 or 12, and I'm not sure a lot of 11 or 12-year-old boys at that age would have chosen this, but sort of our spring break, our March break, I decided to go down to Boca Raton and spend a week with Grandpa and Nanny. And it was amazing. In hindsight, I'm not sure why my dad let me to go, considering how bad a driver Fred was. In hindsight, that was questionable, but one of my greatest life stories was truly getting lost in New York as a 12-year-old, Home Alone style. And that is a wonderful story to tell, but it basically follows a week that I spent with Grandpa and Nanny, golfing every single day, going out to dinner with them. And it was that week that, Dave said it best. I'm an 11-year-old boy trying to talk politics with Grandpa, and he wouldn't let me off the hook. He wanted to know my opinion, and it was just always a cherished moment and a memory to spend with Grandpa. So he means a lot, and he will be missed. So here's a poem. I am standing by the seashore. A ship at my side spreads his white sails to the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. He is an object of beauty and strength, and I stand and watch until at last he hangs like a speck of white cloud just where the sun and sky come down to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, "There he goes." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that is all. He is just as majestic in mass and hull and spar as he was when he left my side, and just as able to bear his load of living freight to the places of destination. His diminished size is in me, not in him, and just at the moment when someone at my side says, "There he goes," there are other eyes watching him coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here he comes." Prophet Micah, instead of God, pleads through his prophet. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
I invite Mr. Stephen Lafley, the headmaster of Halifax Grammar School, to speak to Fred's legacy of involvement in the community.
Betty, and members of the Richardson family, I am deeply honored and just a little intimidated to speak today about Fred's professional accomplishments and his legacy. And for those who may not know me, as you've just heard, my name is Stephen Lafley. I am the head of school for the Halifax Grammar School, a community and institution with which I've had a nearly 40-year relationship and where I had the pleasure of meeting Fred. Now, to begin with, I have to be perfectly honest with you. I did not know Fred Richardson well. And yet, curiously, I felt I knew him intimately. And I hope in what I share here today, this will make some sense. Certainly, over the past few days, I have gotten to know Fred's professional accomplishments better. He was rightly lauded as a thinker, a builder, an innovator. He was chief executive officer of major life insurance companies in Nova Scotia, England, the United States, and he was an active leader in numerous organizations and on many boards that enriched lives and built communities. In the truest sense of the word, Fred was a visionary, a person who had that rare crystalline imagination to see the full potential of an organization or an idea, and had that unique gift to realize that potential through the creation and growth of great businesses and organizations. To have and use this innovative spirit just once in a lifetime to create a pioneering institution, as he did with Maritime Life, say, is exceptional. But then to have done it again and again and again is nothing short, but in a way as well that lifted others to excellence in a spirit of community is nothing short of astonishing. I have no doubt, if invited, those who worked with Fred in any one of these organizations would speak at length about his achievements in ways both personal and profound, and likely do so with a warm smile of remembrance. Certainly, Fred's was a life filled with accomplishments. Yet, and here I think Fred would agree with me, accomplishments are really just mileposts along life's road and not the true measure of a life itself. Rather, life's road, if I can extend my modest metaphor, is the creation and articulation of a well-crafted path to a worthy destination, with an open invitation to fellow travelers to come along. To this, I can speak from personal experience, because I have spent nearly 3 decades of my professional life traveling along Fred's road. You see, when Fred was a young father and innovative business leader in the community, he found himself at the center of another maverick experiment at the start of a small school that had big ambitions called the Halifax Grammar School. One of its founders was a fellow by the name of Gordon Kaplan, with whom Fred would become friends. Gordon succinctly articulated the vision of this new enterprise when he said this school should be a place where young people would, quote, eschew mediocrity and achieve excellence. A statement he would punctuate with a passionate slap of his hand on a table. But here's the thing. If Gordon Kaplan's compelling call to arms provided the school with its educational vision, then I think it was Fred's quiet passions that provided the school with its educational values. Consider, Fred was a fervent believer in 3 simple but profound notions: curiosity, knowledge, and dialogue. Whether it was science or math, history or politics, philosophy or the arts, the breadth of his interests were as expansive as his fertile imagination. And for him, the satisfying of curiosity, the pursuit of knowledge, and the exploration of all points of view through dialogue was a deeply rewarding and, more importantly, a social affair. Any invited guest to his dinner table, I have been told, had best come prepared, because as all sat for the meal, the air would soon be rich with probing questions and passionate conversations and pointed invitations to speak. Notably in these conversations, as much as Fred liked to share, he was more eager to listen. And through that act of engaged listening, he had the facility to validate and elevate the speaker. I know without asking, and I've already heard, that anyone in this room who had the pleasure of a conversation with Fred knows exactly what I mean. And this was at the core of Fred's great gift to grammar. When Fred brought his children to that early grammar school, his skill and talent were quickly noted, and he was co-opted into the leadership of the school, where he found himself among the energetic and sometimes, well, fiery founders. Now, you must understand that as with all creations born of high-minded ideals and zealous convictions, this New Halifax Grammar School was fraught with an intense, chaotic creativity, which might well have consumed the young school, which from time to time in those early years it nearly did, except now into this swirling maelstrom comes Fred, a man gentle in temperament and measured in actions, who in turn became the school's treasurer and board member and board chair, among his many other active involvements. Through it all, Fred calmly and clear-headedly, conversation by conversation, engagement by engagement, brought the school his unique talent for realizing a great vision, shaping and shepherding this new community toward its best self, all the while building a sound foundation on which the school could grow. In this understated way, Fred became a profound influence on that school, the Halifax Grammar School, so much so that he was later formally and rightly recognized as an honorary founder. Still, though these were all extraordinary contributions, Fred had more to give. Some years later, after his own children made their way through the school, and after traveling the world to make his professional mark, Fred returned to grammar. And on one lovely sunny day in September of 2015, his granddaughter Aria, now a student at the school, had the pleasure of formally touring Betty and Fred through the newest iteration of grammar, which had now grown to 2 campuses. As described by those who were there, Fred walked through the old Atlantic Street campus, no doubt swept up in some nostalgia, and no doubt swept up by the surprise at what grammar had become. And perhaps as well, he was surprised to see that though so much had changed, the values he held so dearly and had modeled for so many so long ago was still there, still central to the school's mission. He delighted in watching how grammar inspired and nourished Aria, and he continued to be a generous benefactor and great friend to the school. The last time I had the pleasure of a conversation with Fred was on another sunny day in September, this time in 2018, on the day we opened our new One Grammar campus, our physical cathedral-like expression to those visions and values. Fred was not well at the time, but I suspect he was intent on being at that opening no matter what. And I remember Karen walking him through the front doors and into the new school, where we found him a plush chair and placed it in the center of a beautiful atrium not far from a brass crest of the school that was now embedded into the floor. And there Fred sat, ironically, once again, the calm in the center of a swirling, joyous chaos that was grammar that day, as hundreds of people, teachers and students, families and friends gathered to celebrate the grandest moment yet of grammar's great history. And even though Fred was not well, Fred was Fred. And soon he was engaged in multiple conversations. And as I moved around the room, I would look over from time to time and watch him, and his face was animated with interest as he leaned toward the speaker, listening intently to what he or she had to say. At other times, I saw him sitting in a serene silence, just taking it all in, marveling, I had hoped, at the community and the school that he so fundamentally helped to build and to shape. And as that wonderful day wound to its end, I took my opportunity to approach, and Fred and I chatted for a time. Naturally, Fred was complimentary and generous and far too kind to me. And when it was time to go, knowing that he had meant so much to the school, and knowing that despite not feeling well, he had once again come to share in the grammar community's great success, I knelt by his side, I put my hand on his arm and said, "Thank you," which now feels so woefully inadequate an expression of gratitude for the richness that he had given to our community, and yet knowing Fred's modesty and humility were probably the right words. And now Fred is gone, and we are all so much lesser for the loss. And yet he leaves behind his road, on which we still travel. And therein lies Fred's greatest gift to grammar, because every student, every teacher, every family who has passed through our school and adopted our values has taken up a lifelong commitment to curiosity, knowledge, and dialogue. And in doing so, they have not just embraced grammar's greatest lessons, they have embraced Fred's greatest legacy. And we are all the richer for it.
And Fred's daughter, Sherry Richardson.
You've all heard from so many people about what a special person my dad was. He was Fred, he was Freddie, he was Freddie Bear, he was Uncle Fred, he was Grandpa, he was Grampy, he was Dad. He was so special to so many people in the family, and his accomplishments in business, in family, in the community were truly amazing. I would ask him, Dad, what's the secret of your success? What did you do? How did you do this? And he said, well, I picked the right parents, and I grew up on a farm in the Depression. He says, and that's what made me the successful person that I became. His mother, at the age of 12, lived in northern Alberta, and there were no schools. So they put her on a train to the old homestead, the old family farm that we all know in Ontario, because once she got there, there were enough children for that one-room schoolhouse. And she finished school in that one-room schoolhouse, and she became the teacher in that one-room schoolhouse, and all her children went to that one-room schoolhouse, and her oldest daughter taught in that one-room schoolhouse. Fred got the privilege of going into town to go to high school. There was no money for university in those days. It wasn't even to be a consideration. This is a farm. This is the Depression. It wasn't going to happen. But Fred was so intelligent and so determined, and he wanted to go to university. And the people in the town recognized that, and they volunteered to help Fred. And they went to Grandpa, and he sold some of the trees on the farm for timber to pay so that Fred could go to university. And Fred was the first one on either side of that family to ever go to university. He was followed, of course, by his siblings who weren't going to be outdone. They all went ahead and got university degrees later on when it was possible, and they all went on to incredibly stellar careers in different fields. Fred had a scholarship to Queen's, and I know we talked about his athletic prowess, but at Queen's you had to take a sport. So he determined that there were two sports that didn't require a great deal of practice. I don't know if I'd say they didn't require mayhem, but he didn't have to come out for practices. What he was in university was a boxer and a long-distance runner. And those were the sports that he went out for at university. He studied math at Queen's, and he had every intention of becoming a teacher. That's what he wanted to do. And partway through his career at Queen's, the teachers went on strike. And he said, that's not for me. I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to go into business. That was the turning point for what became an absolutely, as we all know, spectacular business career. Education was so important to him. The business was so important to him. The community was so important to him. And his family was so important to him. He was delighted when the family grew to include 6 children from the original 3. And he was even more delighted when the family grew and grew and grew. He was a generous person, despite the frugality that came from being that depression baby. He was a contradiction in terms when it came to that, but any and all people in his family who wanted any kind of higher education, Fred was there to help with that higher education. It's no great surprise that among the family gathered here today, we have a number of teachers, and we have a number of business people, and we have doctors, and we have a lawyer. He especially delighted in the award-winning poet and the actress. Those were a little bit of change of pace from the other professionals in the family. Fred started his career at Empire Life in Kingston. He was invited by his mentor, Jay Logie, to move to Halifax to come work for Maritime Life. He'd never been to Halifax. They packed up the car with the 2 little kids and drove to Halifax. Well, they really liked Halifax. And Fred began his process of revolutionizing a rather staid life insurance industry. And it's true, he was brilliant, but he was also incredibly hardworking. And he brought in a punch card system that made Maritime Life the envy of the life insurance world. And he started computers for the life insurance. I mean, they did everything by pen and paper. And he revolutionized that. His management skills and his ability to manage, they were exemplified, and he said that in his memoirs. The person that I'm talking to at that time is the most important person in the world. And what they want to talk about is the most important thing in the world. And that was part of his skill at managing people and managing companies. And he brought that to every company he ever managed. He went on from Maritime Life. He felt that after 10 years, you'd probably done all that you could for a company and a job, and you needed to move on. And he moved on with Betty to London, England, to run Abbey Life. And Betty was with him every step of the way. She built him the most beautiful homes all over the world, and all those travels. We all delighted in the flat in London, the castle in Hartford, the mansion in Boca, on top of all the other family trips. And so many of us got to see places and do things, and it was absolutely fantastic. But Fred just kept going in terms of the business and the community. I mean, I didn't know he sat on the Rhodes Scholars Selection Committee for Nova Scotia. He sat on the planning board. He was chair of the United Way in Hartford. Wherever he was, that was part of his philosophy, to communicate and assist those in the community and do something for the community. He went on to run a very successful company in London, and you talk about his driving, it was priceless, because when he took the job in London, they said, well, you're CEO of a major life insurance company in London, England, so here's your chauffeur, and here's your roles. And he said, I don't want those. I want to drive my own car. Well, of course, he was the world's worst driver, and he lost the car a couple of times. But he was going to drive his own car because that was a waste of money. and it really wasn't worth it, and he wasn't prepared to spend money on that. He moved, I think every company he ever worked for, he moved the head office, because that was a matter of economy and efficiency, but he never did it until he consulted with every person in that company. And he asked their opinion of that planned move and what they thought. But again, the Depression baby, he flew all over the world for business. And he always flew economy, because it was a waste of money to fly business or fly first class. He went economy because that was going to get there, and it wasn't worth it to pay for anything else. He and Betty thought, after their time with Abbey Life in London, where he brought in the variable life and was the head of worldwide insurance, he moved to Hartford, ran the Hartford worldwide insurance, traveled all over the world, both for business and pleasure, was involved, again, with many community activities. They decided at 60 that it was time to retire, built their beautiful home in Florida, and then Crown Life came calling. And Crown Life said, Fred, I know you've got this beautiful house in Florida and you want to retire, and we'd like you to come back, and we'd like you to come to Toronto, and we'd like you to run Crown Life for us and try and save the company. And talked it over with Betty, and Betty said, well, I want him back every weekend. So he commuted from Toronto to Florida for 3 years until he moved the company to Regina, at which point it was decided, you know what, that's a really lousy commute. But Fred always loved Halifax. We grew up in Halifax. He always came home to Halifax. They loved it here. That was another one of their beautiful houses, was down at the old Jubilee Boat Club. And they loved the community. They were so involved with the community. I don't know how you summarize those 93 years. They were just so spectacular, with so many accomplishments. And the family, the community, everyone is so much richer for what Fred did. And you say it's 93 years, but it's never long enough. Never at all. But I want to just read you. He wrote his memoirs. And they said, write a book on how to manage. And he said, but I learned to manage from my childhood, from my experiences. And he'd study, he'd plan. And I want to read you just a couple of things that he wrote in his memoirs. The purpose of life is living, a truism. And living is defined by me as experience, responsibility, continuous development, and contribution. That was his life's philosophy. He went on to create a business philosophy when he became, long before he became an actuary and the CEO of all those companies. He had a philosophy of how he was going to achieve these goals in life. And it started with the ethical cornerstone was parental standards of honesty, responsibility, fairness, and consideration for others. A career would be aborted rather than yield to pressure to act unethically. Responsibility would be accepted for failure as well as success. The greater objective was a contribution to making this a better world. An objective included in nightly prayer at the beginning of the career. To achieve success, an employee must identify with the company and understand and contribute to its objectives. Success would involve as many hours as necessary. More and better efforts than others, here's the competitive, must be put into every task and assignment. No predetermined path to advancement would be sought or followed. Appropriate financial rewards would follow contribution. So this was not a major concern or objective of employment. He embodied those old-fashioned virtues, and he passed them along to his family, to his colleagues, to his employees, to his friends, to everyone who knew him. He was a very, very special person, and we're all eternally grateful that we got to know him. Thank you.
I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I'd stay in the garden with him, though the night around me be falling, but he bids me go through the voice of woe. His voice to me is calling. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known.
Reading from the book of Philippians at the 4th chapter and the 4th verse. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Amen. Occasionally, and especially at times like this, I find I envy the Apostle Paul. I don't envy him all the traveling around he had to do in order to accomplish the work of establishing the church all over the ancient Mediterranean lands. I tend to appreciate staying put. And I certainly don't envy him the times he spent in various Roman prisons and dungeons, which presumably seems pretty obvious. But what I do envy the Apostle Paul is the opportunities those various abidings and cooling his heels in Roman prisons and dungeons hither and yon afforded him to write letters to individuals and to the church congregations he cared about. Letters like the one we just heard a piece from his letter to the church in Philippi. Letters in which the Apostle Paul could sort of sum all the things up, express all his gratitudes and joys and best hopes, articulate all the meanings that everything has had for him, put into words the values and the principles he's tried very hard to embody and to manifest. Letters through which he could offer all of these up as essentially his last words. Not just in the hope that they'll somehow matter to the people who eventually hear them, but also because there must have been for him, the Apostle Paul, a kind of grounded restfulness in the thinking back, in the distillation of what's mattered most, in the summing of all things up, in shaping his last words. In theory, I suppose, all of us do have that opportunity that the Apostle Paul has as he writes from a Roman prison, knowing the end of his life is drawing near, but few of us really have it presented to us so obviously. And in fact, what we might hope for instead, truly, is to simply slip away, just gently and peacefully. Absence of last words and summing all the things up notwithstanding. Unless we're very lucky, and our last words and summing all the things up can maybe be echoed in the words of the Apostle Paul himself. It's good to have so many memories and such a full picture of Fred's life shared in this service of thanksgiving for him, because my knowledge of him was so brief and so limited, and at the distance of 2 generations of his expanded family. But in a sense, it's maybe actually that distance that's allowed the echoes I hear in those last words of the Apostle Paul to the church in Philippi of how Fred's own summing up of all those he loved best might have found its way into words. Because Fred didn't just live and work deeply grounded in principles of honor and trueness and rightness and duty and excellence. He embodied these principles with integrity and with generosity, always. And he transmitted them, even down generations, in that solidness and groundedness, but also expansive warmth of the way he lived. These roots he laid down with purpose, reflecting the values he himself had grown up with. They nourished the building of a life not only of professional success, but of abundant kindness and care, at the heart of a loving family and a circle of friends, as both grew over the many years of his life and widened. There are examples that sometimes we're lucky enough to have in our lives, who might never themselves say the words the Apostle Paul says, keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. But we hear them unsaid anyway, in all the memories we have. And so we try to. Because the Apostle Paul is right. When these roots are laid down, these values of honor and integrity and excellence, these values of generosity and loving kindness and warmth, when these roots are laid down, what grows is a life that's strong and beautiful and rich in goodness, that's remembered with such gratitude, and also continues in all that's been learned and received and heard and seen. You have been so lucky, but you know that. And as the God of peace has been with Fred all his life, the God of peace will continue to be with you, as his memory is a blessing. Amen. Let us pray. Eternal God, you are our comfort and our strength. And we praise you for the love that cares for us in life and watches over us in death. We live before you this day and give you thanks for your servant, Fred, for the gift of his life, for all in him that was good and kind and faithful, for the grace you gave him that enabled him to live generously and lovingly. We thank you that for Fred, death is past, its pathway peaceful, and that he has now entered into newness of life in you. But look kindly upon us who are left behind, O God, in this time of sorrow, as we're reminded again of the fragility of life. Help us to draw strength from good memories and to care for one another with compassion and grace. Give courage and faith to Fred's family and his dear friends, that they may have the strength to meet the days ahead. May we care for one another with compassion. May all regrets be quieted and our good memories remain strong. And may we live each day to its fullest, trusting that at its end we too will be received into the peace of your presence. These prayers we raise to you, trusting in your love and care in this life and beyond, and praying together as you taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Let us join together in singing the hymn, Love Divine. Let us pray. Eternal God, who breathed into lifeless dust and from the first fashioned us in your image, we commend to you our brother Fred, and we commit him into your care, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. May God bless him. May God's face shine upon him and be gracious to him. May God look upon him with kindness and give him peace. Amen. And now as we leave this place, may God grant us peace and comfort filling our hearts with hope and our spirits with courage. May God's love be known to us in one another, and may we travel in the blessing of God's presence. Amen.